Well, it is a Thursday. It's time for On the Record, our weekly feature where we look at the pressing issues of the day. And of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa today launching the much anticipated Jobs Summit to try and tackle South Africa's worsening unemployment crisis. The numbers are dire. 27% of us are out of work, and those are just those who are looking for employment. Add another 10% if you counter those who have given up. So what's the plan to get 9.6 million South Africans into jobs? That's what the summit is hoping to address, but already there are signs that are not encouraging. There were protests outside the venue, and Trade Union Federation SAFTU declined to attend, saying there are no new ideas on the table. We're joined now by Matthew Parks from rival federation COSATU in the studio, and in our Pretoria studios by political economist Sia Beniza. Good evening to you both, gentlemen, and I'll start with you, Matthew. I mean, is this not yet another talk shop?
We hope it's not. We're pleased as COSATU that the President has responded positively to our demand for a job summit. As you said, we have an economic crisis with 1 out of 3 workers unemployed. We have thousands of workers being retrenched on a daily basis across all sectors of the economy. So we have two options: to sit in a corner and sulk and do nothing, or to engage with industry, with government, and find a solution. So for us, this is not the end of the road, it's the beginning of the road. We need a lot of work to be done, but we're pleased that government has heeded our call, that business has come to the table. There's some positive commitments around investment, around how to protect fragile industries, how to grow new industries. But also we had a positive commitment by both government and the private sector to halt retrenchments, to fill critical vacancies in the public sector and so on. But this is the beginning of a road, not the end of it.
Right, let me bring Sia into this conversation in our Pretoria studios. Sia, good evening to you and welcome to this conversation. Is it just about the government, particularly the President, of course, committing to demands for a jobs summit? There are those who would say we've got the National Development Plan, we've had these kinds of strategies. The problem really is implementation.
Yeah. I think that's definitely it. You hit the nail on the head there. So I think beyond just the commitments that have taken place, we need to actually implement. Because this is not the first time we've had these sorts of commitments. I think earlier this year already with the Presidential Youth Employment Service, there have been commitments. It would have been interesting to have a bit of report back on what has been achieved thus far, to just gain confidence that this summit is not just a talk shop. And I think one of the things I can sort of critique from the speech is there's a common mention of partners, but these social partners aren't really clarified as to which companies they are, which industries they're going to be working in. And so it really doesn't give much confidence that this is anything different from what we've seen for the past. And I think beyond that, lumped obviously with the stimulus package that was recently announced, the idea is that the summit's commitments together with the stimulus package will be able to unlock at least the short-term bottlenecks to economic growth and development. But I think the government has taken quite a lenient, or at least a liberal and soft stance towards this, instead of trying to review or amend some of the existing policies. Bringing everyone together to commit is just one thing, but the policies are really what's going to depend on whether the outcomes will be met or not.
Matthew, you're hearing Sia saying that it's essentially the same old talk that we've had before. And yes, of course, we can always tweak a few things to get some efficiencies improved, for example. But there's no big idea that we've heard today that's going to open the floodgates, is there?
Sure, look, I think those are some of our own frustrations, that we need to deal with the structural issues in the economy. But I think what we can say, there is a positive change here. I think when we have a new president who's got a firm commitment of cleaning up the mess, both in the economy and in the state. I think many of the difficulties of the past 10 years in South Africa has been the explosion of corruption in the state and how that has wasted billions of rands that could have been used in the economy to spur growth. But also, even on this plan, there's quite a detailed sector-by-sector approach, looking at fragile sectors like clothing, agriculture, and so on, but also looking at new sectors where we think we can grow the economy, be it in energy, be it in water, be it in recycling, tourism, agriculture, and so on. But again, look, first, the proof is in the pudding. We've got a good plan on the table, massive commitments by government in the stimulus package of 50 billion rand. The banking sector today is committed to spending 100 billion rand on industrialization, but for us it's about implementation. But the summit will finish tomorrow, but we are going to have ongoing meetings with the working groups to make sure that things are actioned, to check where the blockages, etc.
Sia, big business, big labor, big government, as one economist put it, but where was small business? Where were the small guys? Locked outside, protesting, saying they want a seat at the table. And again, we're hearing the same messages. We're going to get funding into manufacturing. We're going to get a big industrial projects. That's not going to be the way. We've tried it. It hasn't worked.
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest critiques I have for the summit generally. The sort of national top-down approach that government is taking is not really speaking to the plight of the people who are in the isolated rural areas and townships. For me, I mean, one of the critiques that I heard some of the analysts speaking about earlier today was, I mean, it would have been more interesting if the summit was held in a place where there is the highest form of unemployment in terms of a township, for example, or even in a different province from Gauteng. Some of the worst high unemployment rates in the country are in the Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, and Free State. And I think if really the government is sincere about trying to reallocate or reprioritize townships and far-flung areas, one of the steps that they could have taken is to host the summit there. But then again, there's very little talk about how we're going to actually open up the space for the new entrants. Just providing seed funding and support for agricultural business, particularly agro-processing, is not necessarily enough. There's a huge challenge in terms of the market concentration and the barriers to entry that exist for new entrants, and there was very little mention of that. And I think beyond that, what is actually being done at the local level in order to ensure that this pact is not just done by national or multinational so-called development partners, but that on the ground in the local municipalities and the rural areas, that the government understands the context that's there, and that also there is a commitment from the business that is there.
Zia, let me ask you this question. I'll put the same one to Matthew in a moment. There is also a criticism, some might say, that government is playing softly here because of concerns. We're coming into an election season. They've got to make sure that Labour is on side, and that some of these obstacles around what the NDP already says are because they're trying too hard to accommodate the Labour movement.
Yeah, look, I think that's definitely a challenge that the government's got in terms of balancing all the different forces and the different interests that are at stake. The economy is in such a dire condition that everyone is really, trying to compete for the voice in terms of getting their problems across to government in order to get that resolved. But one of the things that I would definitely agree with is this sort of the notion that we'll only just sort of be focusing on cooperating with big business and creating jobs without dealing with the other structural issues such as, the education system and how we're going to create a safe environment for teachers, or even resuscitate the respectful position that teachers have in the value chain of the labor market. So I definitely think that the balancing of different acts is definitely critically important and difficult, and that we keep planning at times when the economy seems to be going for the worst. So for example, when we did the National Development Plan, we were sort of at the top of a commodity super cycle, and some of the targets that we set there were far more exceeding than what we can currently achieve in the current conditions with the trade war with Trump, with the challenges in the global economy. And I think that perhaps we might be setting ourselves up for a bit of failure, given that, again, we're making huge plans at a time when oil, for example, is reaching above $75 a barrel, when we're already starting to see the initial effects of that on the local economy in terms of the increase in fuel price, etc. So we're headed for a more difficult economic condition. So this will make it even more challenging for government to achieve some of the goals that it's setting itself now.
Well, oil is now sitting at $86 a barrel, which brings me to you, Matthew. Is the labor movement in this country obstructionist as far as this issue is concerned? There are those who would say, you guys are merely protecting the workers who already have jobs. You're not too concerned about those that don't.
No, sure, look, that'll be a terrible fallacy. Our first mandate is to protect workers' jobs. That's what a trade union does. It protects the interests of the workers. But look, workers support the unemployed. The average worker in this country supports about 7 other people. In fact, one of the most difficult things facing the working class and the middle class is the huge burden of supporting unemployed relatives. So that's why we're so keen not only to protect workers' jobs who are threatened, be it at SAA, Eskom, in the mining sector, the clothing sector, but also how to create more jobs, because then you'll help to lessen the pressure upon workers. If you get more people employed, they have more money to spend on the economy. That'll help to grow the local economy and help to move things forward.
Sia mentions education as being one of the areas we need to target. We all know that in general we have a low skills base. Would it not be to the benefit of workers if we found ways for employers to create jobs without the punitive measures that our strict labor laws place on employers?
Look, again, we actually disagree with people who say the laws are too strict. When we had the 2008 economic crisis in this country and globally, 1 million workers lost their jobs within a year. So there was no burdensome approach for employers to dismiss workers.
Well, the money was simply not there.
And you see today, even in the last 2 years, 72,000 mine workers have been dismissed, retrenched. So we don't see what the issue is there. In fact, other European countries have got much stricter labor laws, but have got higher growth rates.
But let's take Eskom as an example. We know the difficulties the power utility faces, is cash-strapped. Sure. This year, when there was talk that there would be no salary increases or bonuses, what did we see? The country was plunged into darkness. The utility blamed workers for even things like sabotage. I mean, that's the environment we are working in, yet given the pressures on this economy, can we afford that?
Look, even with the Eskom, so they claim there was sabotage, yet we've not seen a single person being charged with it. So for our workers, the feedback we've had from our members on the ground, Eskom has simply made up stuff. But I think, look, the issue in Eskom is...
But that we were plunged into darkness specifically around that issue. As soon as it was resolved, as soon as promises were made, the lights were back on.
Well, look, for us, the real issue in Eskom has been the looting. That you've had literally hundreds of billions of rands that have been stolen, looted, wasteful expenditure, not by workers, not by the electrician or the technician on the ground, but by management, by politicians, the friends. So for us, Eskom has to clean up the stolen money, recover it, and show a serious effort to recover it. But also we think Eskom needs to start to invest in the future, like electric vehicles, electric cars, exporting to Africa again, because that's the way to protect Eskom and to grow it, because we can't afford simply to close it down.
Sia, has government owned up to its own mistakes? We've mentioned in this conversation, a conversation really around state capture and what we've seen in the last 10 years, for example, in terms of looting. But even in terms of the own goals, I mean, many would say that that stimulus package the president announced was really to kind of play catch up with what we've been doing wrong. Let's take a sector like tourism. I mean, can you think of a country more far-flung than New Zealand, yet it brings in more tourists than we do, and we have so much more to offer?
Yeah, look, I think you're pointing at a bigger challenge within the state itself, right? So the state is really trying to position itself as a developmental state. And one of the key factors that you need to take into account for the development state is that it needs to be clear and a highly capacitated state. Clear in terms of its policy articulation, but also in terms of the direction that the government's taking with its development plan. And this we haven't been doing very well. So we've got the National Development Plan, but after we published it, we never really went back, and what we saw are iterations of sort of 14-point plan, 10-point plan, 9-point plan, 7-point plan. Every year in terms of the State of the Nation address, there was a new plan. So already that is where we're failing fundamentally in terms of a developmental state. My bigger concern, though, and this is another factor that you need to consider for developmental states, is that you need a state that can insulate itself from private influence, from detracting it from the national agenda, right? So the idea is that a developmental state can reorientate private interests and coordinate it such that it coincides with the national interest. And that's where we've failed particularly, and the state capture saga expresses this, as well as what we're seeing now coming out of the Commission. So on two accounts that are very critical for the government to play the role that it needs to play in meaningfully redirecting the economy on a more sustainable trajectory, we are failing. But I think what's positive coming out of the summit and the way in which President Ramaphosa has managed his negotiation with the different parties is that it's a multi-stakeholder approach. Whether it will yield the intended results, I'm not so sure, but I guess we'll have to watch closely and ensure that the monitoring and evaluation mechanism is as effective as some of the plans that are coming up to deal with the challenges that we're facing.
All right, Sia Beniza, political economist in our Pretoria studio, and of course Cosatu's Matthew Parks here in studio with me in Johannesburg. So it is a multi-stakeholder approach. There are those who would say that merely means it's a holding job. We'll wait to see the outcomes that will emerge out of the final day tomorrow. But when it comes to things like youth unemployment, we're sitting on a powder keg and we dare not fail. This is On the Record. You're watching The Full View.